Hey, Todd Ault here. I'm so happy to present you this keynote speaker from our Risk On Business Conference. I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. All right, normally I ad-lib things, but I'm not ad-libbing on this one. I grew up in Huntington Beach, California, played football at Edison High School, wanted to play for the Oklahoma Sooners, but Barry Switzer said I was a white boy that ran a 4.9 40, and I was not going to play. And so I decided to go work on Wall Street. Okay, this next gentleman, Leigh Steinberg. If you don't know him, you saw the movie about his life, Jerry Maguire. Leigh Steinberg is considered the greatest sports agent of all time. He's a real-life living legend, an Academy Award for Jerry Maguire. Leigh, unrivaled history in record contracts. $4 billion of sports contracts, 300 professional athletes in basketball, baseball, boxing, golf, football, as well as Olympic athletes, where Leigh has represented the first overall pick of the National Football League, unprecedented 8 times, and 64 first-round picks. Most recently, Leigh represented Kansas City Chiefs Patrick Mahomes, negotiating a $475 million contract, which in turn can go up to $503 million if all goes well. This is the second highest contract in sports history, behind Lionel Messi, if you like soccer. Anybody here like soccer? That's what I thought. Before making himself in the sports industry, Leigh was born and raised in Los Angeles, California by his parents, a teacher, a librarian. He earned both a BA degree and a law degree from the University of Berkeley, Cal Berkeley. He twice served as student body president consecutively. Leigh doesn't, I'm going to go a little bit off script. This is a guy who has been on top of the world and admits when he had personal problems, he has affected the lives of so many people. He is very interested in traumatic brain injury, a topic that's important to me, Alzheimer's. Leigh puts on one of the most amazing charity parties every year for the Super Bowl. Everybody here should be thrilled to meet Leigh Steinberg, my friends. Everybody, Leigh Steinberg, let's play the video. When you come to the Risk On conference, you meet some of the best people in the world. Everybody, Leigh Steinberg.
Thank you, sir.
All right.
Good morning, everyone. I've been on a long trip. I don't know how you got here today, but I got here via Chicago, Cleveland, Orlando, Atlanta, and now I'm in Las Vegas. I didn't think I'd go all the way from all those things to Gay Paris, right? Now I'm back in Paris. At any rate, what I want to do is talk to you about 4 key concepts today. And so a film director named Cameron Crowe came to me and asked if he could follow me around for a film that would feature a sports agent at its core. And so he went everywhere I went. And he went to league meetings, he went all over the place, and asked me to talk to him about what stories I had and what I did. And that became the movie Jerry Maguire. So I had to vet the script to make sure the willing suspension of disbelief that holds you in a motion picture didn't get broken, that you didn't think the dialogue was phony, that you did not think that the look was phony, but kept you in. And then he assigned me some of the actors. I took a young actor named Cuba Gooding Jr. down, who won the Best Supporting Actor Oscar. I took him down to Phoenix for the Super Bowl and made him pretend he was a wide receiver all week. So he had to hang out and pretend I was his agent. And I actually showed the quarterback in that film, played by Jerry O'Connell, how to throw a spiral, because he had gone to NYU and they didn't have a football program there. So there's a lot of life up there on the screen, but there was one tag that came out, one line, and I've never walked through an airport or been out to dinner where someone didn't run up to me and ask me to say the 4 words or said them to me that start with "show me the." So what I thought today we'd do is we took the acronym S.H.O.W, and the S is for seeking and treasuring relationships. The H is for honing your negotiation skills. The O is to obligate yourself to stay in process. And then the W is win every day, because you can always recover. So at any rate, those 4 principles we'll talk about today. But when it comes to seeking and treasure relationships, I want to tell you how I got started. So I'm a dorm counselor in an undergrad dorm at UC Berkeley. And I started out as student body president when the governor of California is Ronald Reagan. And every time we demonstrate in the late 60s, Governor Reagan cracks down, so I learned everything I needed to learn about the art of negotiating from dealing with Governor Reagan. And later he went on to give me a presidential commendation, but I didn't think it was, and we were warm, but we weren't warm back then. And I became a dorm counselor in an undergraduate dormitory, and they moved the freshman football team into the dorm. And one of the students was a quarterback named Steve Bartkowski. And he became the very first player picked in the first round of the 1975 NFL draft. So I was a young lawyer struggling with where I was going to work, and Bartkowski asked me to represent him. So there I was, brimming with legal experience, never having practiced before. And I had the first pick in the first round of the NFL draft. And we got the largest rookie contract in history. So we arrive in Atlanta to sign it, and we get to the airport, and there are Klieg lights flashing in the sky, huge crowds pressed up against the police line. And the first thing we hear is, we interrupt the Johnny Carson show to bring you a special news bulletin. Steve Bartkowski and his attorney have just arrived at the Atlanta airport. We switch you live for an in-depth interview. Well, I looked at Bartkowski the way that Dorothy looked at Toto when they got to Munchkin Land. And I said, I know we're not in Berkeley anymore. And I saw the intense idol worship and veneration that athletes are held in communities across this country, how they are the movie stars, they are the celebrities. So I was raised by a father with 2 core values. One was treasure relationships, especially family. So the question was, were you a good son? Were you a good brother? Were you a good father? Did you raise kids with unconditional love and support so they believed they could do anything? Could you be a friend to people where it wasn't convenient to be a friend, where it might cost you a little bit to support them? And ultimately, were you a good father? because parenting children well probably is our most sacred task on this planet. And his second was make a meaningful difference in the world and help people who can't help themselves. Be someone that cured pain, that dealt with problems. And he had a corollary. He said, when you're looking for someone to solve a problem, as minor as picking a piece of paper up off the floor, or as major as dealing with climate change or racism, he'd say the tendency is to sit and wait for they or them to solve the problem in life. The amorphous they, business figures, political figures, older people. And he'd look at me and say, you could wait forever, son. The they is you. You are the they. So it imbues you with a sense of personal responsibility. So I started asking the athletes by profiling them and their background, and understood that with these athletes, I needed to get to know them. So listening skills were really important. And they're important to all of us, right? Can you create an atmosphere of trust around another human being so that little by little they'll peel back the layers of the onion and reveal who they really are? Now, it won't come as a surprise to the women in this group that men don't tend to share their deep emotional feelings quite as easily as women do. So you have to get below the surface. If someone's walking down the street who's a man, he just got a diagnosis, stage 4 cancer, you ask him how he's doing, he'll say, great, I feel great. We have to cut below that and draw another person out, how they feel about short-term economic gain, long-term economic security, family issues, geographical location, autonomy, making a difference in the world. What is critical and key? If you can draw out another person and get to their deepest anxieties and fears, and greatest hopes and dreams, you can navigate your way through life gracefully. So I realized then that I could represent athletes and get them to retrace their roots. So they go back to the high school community where they set up a scholarship fund or work with the Boys and Girls Club or work with the church. And then they go to the collegiate institution. So Troy Aikman endowed a full scholarship at UCLA, or Edgerrin James at the University of Miami, or Steve Young at BYU, or Kerry Collins at Penn State. And then we challenge them to find something in their own life that is problematic that they would like to leave a legacy for. And we put a charitable foundation together, and we take the leading business figures, political figures, and community leaders and put them on a board to execute the program. So that would be Warrick Dunn, former running back for the Atlanta Falcons, in a program we set up called Homes for the Holidays, where he's taken 200 single mothers and their families and put them in the first home they'll ever own by making a down payment and then outfitting the home. So it's athletes changing lives. It's Patrick Mahomes, the quarterback of the Kansas City Chiefs, setting up 15 in the Mahomies, where he helps at-risk kids, kids that have health challenges. It's athletes making a difference. And the other thing they can do is message. They can message in a way where I had the heavyweight champion of the world in boxing, Lennox Lewis, cut a public service announcement that said, real men don't hit women. And that could do more because of the high profile and macho nature of the athlete to trigger behavioral changes on the issue of domestic violence than 1,000 authority figures ever could. So we've raised almost $1 billion for charities all across the country over time. And when the athlete's doing it, it builds skills in them that are non-athletic skills. And it's a way to prepare also for second career. So relationships are the key here. And I have another saying, be kind to your future self, which is do those things today, make those friendships, nurture those relationships that may not have an immediate payoff. But 5 years from now, you'll be the beneficiary of the fact that you laid those roots, foundations, got to know someone, got to bond with someone. So the second aspect of this is hone your negotiation skills. And again, the first part of that is listening. It's drawing out another human being. It's the ability to put yourself in their heart and mind and see the world the way they see it. So whether I'm recruiting a new client or negotiating, I need to see the world the way the other person does it. So it's drawing them out and preparing, and then it's obviously preparation. So I had a client named Troy Aikman, and he played for the Dallas Cowboys. And Dallas is owned by a really low-key fellow named Jerry Jones. You know, he's just shy and non-assertive and all the rest of it. Anyway, we're negotiating the contract for Troy Aikman. I'm doing it on a cell phone. And you think of a cell phone as a private form of communication, right? Well, it's not. It's a broadcast going out on, in essence, like a radio, and anyone can interfere. So I said to Jerry, we've got to have $10 million in this deal. And he said, son, that dog won't hunt. Now, I sort of took that to mean he wasn't agreeing, right, to the concept. And I said, but Jerry, $10 million is eminently fair. And he said, son, we left fair behind about $8 million ago. And so he said, I'll pay you 9. And I said, 10 is what we need, Jerry. And he said 9. And all of a sudden, this voice comes over to the cell phone and says, I've been listening to your conversation. Take the money. So that is how we ended up making that deal. We did a small deal a couple years ago for a fellow named Patrick Mahomes, which ended up being the largest amount of money in the history of the sport. But I care about fans too, and not alienating and pushing away those fans. Another key is obligating yourself to stay in process. So what do I mean by that? Life comes down to these critical moments. And 2 months ago, we had 4 NFL games come down to the very last play. Now, the actuarial odds of having 4 athletic contests come down to the last play, I could go over to that sports book and win $1 zillion predicting that. But what it means is that peak performance in critical situations is key. So Patrick Mahomes comes out in a playoff game, and he has 11 seconds on the clock. 11 seconds. So let's do this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. That's how much time he has to move the ball 80 yards down the field to tie up a playoff game. So what's critical? What's critical is that in adversity, in critical moments, the athlete's throwing a couple interceptions, the crowd is booing, the center's looking at him like he's on hallucinogens. What are you doing? The game's getting out of hand. What does the quarterback do in that situation? What do any of us do in that situation? Can you compartmentalize, forget the past, adopt a quiet mind, and elevate your level of play or your level of performance in critical situations? Can you do that? And then that leads me to the point that you can always recover, W. So 12 years ago, I was sitting on my father's bed, and my life had been reduced to, how can I find more vodka? That was the only thought in my life. I had succumbed to alcohol. And I was filled with wreckage around me. And I had an epiphany that I wasn't living up to my dad's core values. I wasn't being a great parent, and I wasn't making a difference in the world in a fundamental way. So, but I had an epiphany that I wasn't a starving peasant in Darfur, that I wasn't with the last name Steinberg in Nazi Germany, that I wasn't sitting in Ukraine with bombs coming down on me. So what excuse did I have not to do that? So in those situations, it's resilience. Life will knock you back, but can you get back up off the floor and try again? And do you have a sense of optimism? So I sort of was brought up by an optimistic father, and what he would say is that there's always light at the end of the tunnel, that you can get past whatever it is. So I went into sober living. I joined a 12-step program, and I felt like Sisyphus, who pushes that massive ball up the slope, and every time you get it up a couple steps, you go back a couple steps. So you have to keep pushing and pushing. But I was brought up to believe that if there was a barn filled with defecation, there must be a pony in there somewhere, right? There must be a pony, that at the darkness, there's light at the end of the tunnel. So I'll tell you a football story. There was a player named Ben Roethlisberger that played for Pittsburgh. And he was very superstitious. And so it came time to play in the Denver playoff game with the Steelers. And one great thing about representing athletes is you get great tickets to games, right? So I called him up to see if he was leaving my tickets at will call. And there was silence on the other end of the phone. And I said, Ben, what about will call? He says, well, there's a problem. He says, you know I'm superstitious. And you were at the AFC Championship game last year in Pittsburgh, and we lost. I said, well, Ben, there were 70,000 other people there too, right? And he says, I know, but I got this worked out. Wouldn't be a good idea for you to come to Denver. So I said, the tickets won't be there? He said, well, you could wait at will call, but you'll be waiting the entire game. So they go to Detroit, and now Pittsburgh's in the Super Bowl, and they win. So we're in the bus on the way back, and I said, Ben, guess what? You just won the Super Bowl, and I'm here. I guess that means I get to go to more Super Bowls. He says, yes, but never an AFC Championship game. So you deal with some interesting personalities. I'm just going to give you a little bit about sports economics. In 1976, the year after I started, each team as its share of the national television contract made $2 million per team per season. And then we had the explosion of satellite television and cable television. So instead of 3 competitive networks, there became 300 all fighting against each other. And the teams went to the networks, and I threw a Super Bowl party on the back lot of 20th Century Fox, and Rupert Murdoch was there. And I said, Rupert, you need to buy the NFC television package. Why? Because it's the only way Fox is ever going to be able to show their promos Sunday afternoon to promote the big profit maker, which is Monday through Friday prime time. And at that point, Fox had 21 Jump Street on, and they had Beverly Hills 90210, and then they had test patterns. I don't know if some of you who are older remember there was a big Indian, and it would just go, ooh, all night. And so I said, it's going to cost you more money to buy these rights, but the bottom line is you're going to build Fox as a network. And now multiple bidders came into the scene, and you had more games on television, you had more analysis shows, highlight shows, exponentially more sports. So what happened to the rights fees is they went from $2 million per year to 17 to 45 to 72. Last year, every team made $200 million as their share of the national television contract. And they just signed a new one where Fox and CBS went up by 85%, which means they doubled in a tanked economy in a pandemic time. They doubled the rights fees. So each team at the end of that will make $350 million per team per season, just opening their doors. Jerry Jones bought the Dallas Cowboys in 1989, and they cost him $140 million. Today, Dallas is valued at $5.5 billion. The New England Patriots were bought for $170 million in 1994. They now are worth $4 billion. We have brand new stadium with jumbo scoreboards and naming rights and luxury boxes. 40 million people a week play fantasy football. So we may be challenged in the ability to compete against the Chinese, in world economics, but we sure as hell can beat them in fantasy football, right? So at any rate, you have all of these different revenue sources. What I'd like to leave you with before our host, Todd, comes up, and did Todd do a magnificent job putting this entire thing together? Kudos to him, because we're not sitting in front of a computer screen right now playing video games. We're not texting or talking to everybody. We're focused on how you recover, how you come back in a time of crisis. And what I'd like to leave you with is that in those darkest moments, when the whole world seems to have abandoned you, if you have a belief in yourself, you can come back and recover. Life will push you back with temporary setbacks. It's inevitable. But in that darkest hour, sitting on my father's bed, having given up my practice, having given up my condo, with my life in ruins, I saw there was a better time ahead. All of us can recover. All of us can make a fundamental difference in the world in our own way. Parenting is the sacred function of all of us. It can be that, or it can be solving one of the problems in the world. But you have the ability to live out and fulfill your greatest dreams, and you need to have that vision when you're at your darkest hour. Thank you.
Leigh Steinberg. As I said earlier, I grew up in Huntington Beach, Newport Beach area, and I think from the time I was probably 10 years old, Leigh became a super agent, like just this iconic figure in Newport. I don't know that I had ever even thought of my lifetime that I'd be sitting with him on stage. So I brought my son back to meet him. But more importantly, I don't know if you guys know this, but Leigh is a huge contributor, huge philanthropist, and does a lot cares about the players, working on solutions for traumatic brain injury and concussions. I think you had what's called the brain bar?
Oh, that was the Brain Lounge.
Brain Lounge. Can you tell everyone a little about what you're doing there?
So I had a crisis of conscience back in the early 90s. I'm representing half the starting quarterbacks in the NFL, and they keep getting hit in the head, Todd. And when we would go to doctors and ask how many is the magic number where you should contemplate retirement, what are the long-term implications, no doctors could tell us. So I started having concussion conferences with leading neurologists from across the country. And what we found out eventually was that 3 or more concussions occasion an exponentially larger degree of proclivity towards Alzheimer's, premature senility, Parkinson's, chronic traumatic encephalopathy, and depression. So what makes the brain different than every other injury an athlete would get is that it's the brain. We know that a player, when they turn 45, because of the aches and pains of playing a sport that's like a traffic accident on every play, they may have problems leaning over to pick up their child. It's an entirely different consequence for that 45-year-old retired athlete not to be able to recognize their child. And you're fighting athletic denial, the fact that the athletes have accepted a norm of behavior since young. So I started exploring the brain, and your host, Todd's done some breakthrough work that really could be life-changing with Alzheimer's. But I went down to Medellin, Colombia, and had 300 million stem cells inserted. I went to Hawaii and did a treatment called RTMS, which sharpens your memory and sharpens the brain. I've done 140 sessions of hyperbaric oxygen. I've done light stem, which is restorative and helps the brain, but also general recovery. So we're about to see a biomed revolution where there will be solutions, and who of us would not want to live 10 or 15 more years with cognitive sharpness? So what we did at my last Super Bowl party, which was on the back lot of of Sony Studios, where we filmed part of Jerry Maguire, is we aggregated all those healing modalities so that people could be exposed to them. And I'm going to try to introduce them into pro sports, other sports, and then for all of us.
We're going to ask the audience who has 1 or 2 questions, but I've always wanted to ask this question of you. And so you did what is probably I think it's the largest American contract ever with Patrick Mahomes. But when you're asking them for $500 million, do they ask first or do you ask first? Meaning, do you call them up and say, hey, we'll take 500 million, and they say, or do they say, we're willing to give you 500 million?
So we deal with comparables in our style of negotiating. Who is this player like? So you have to do research first, and then we'll come up with a theory for what impact this player makes on the team. And you can look at players in terms of statistics. A quarterback has quarterback rating, number of throws, number of yards, touchdown passes. And then you can look at honors. But ultimately, the judgment is, does this player, is he inextricably intertwined with your effort to get to the Super Bowl or get to the World Series? What's it like if you take the player off? And then you come up based on what the highest part of the market is, and then the rationale for expanding on that. So TV money's going to go up, this is going to go up, the cap's going to go up, and the rest of it. And then we would make a proposal. Now, human nature will tell you that you have to propose a little bit more money than what you're asking for. Because if I were to tell you that this car is worth $30,000, and you're the buyer, and you come in and you say, I'll pay you $30,000 for the car, and the guy says, great. That buyer is going to walk away thinking he might have taken $27,000, he might have taken $25 million, and the car dealer is going to walk away saying, we probably could have got him for $22,000. So you've got to show some progress in this situation. But we would make not just a proposal asking for money, but all the buttressing of why this makes sense, why this theory, whose reality, Todd, is going to prevail. My sense that this is a gifted once-in-a-lifetime player without whom the team will be destined for dire results, or their concept that he's modular, fungible, or replaceable.
So did you send over an offer and say, we'll take 700 million, but agree on 5? That's
Yes.
rhetorical. You know. I mean,
fundamentally, although if someone makes you a ridiculous proposal for that $30,000 car and you're the dealer and they offer you $5,000, don't respond. Because if someone makes you a terrible offer and you're tempted to split the difference, well, if the car's worth $30,000 and they offer $5,000, somehow you're going to end up with $27,000.
Does anybody have a question for Leigh Steinberg?
Hi, Liz. My name is Ben, and my husband really admire you, and he has a patent for baseball, and that's gonna be displayed on the TV, like TV podcast. And he didn't have a chance to go today because he was working. But he asked if any chance that you can represent for his patent to work with Major League Baseball, because before the pandemic, we already have we signed non-disclosure with them, but because the pandemic happened, so it kind of slowed down right now. So I hopefully have a chance to talk, or I can represent it's just only 1 minute video that's super easy to understand for the baseball. We have ball 1, ball 2, strike, and that benefits for all the advertising, and also it benefits with all the deaf people as well.
Is that a question?
Can you repeat the question?
So is that a question?
Her husband has a patent, and she was wondering if she could send some information over regarding it for the MLB.
All right, well, I'm happy to get in touch with you, and if it's something interesting, I'll pass it along to Leigh. Any other question in the back? I apologize, but that was really a statement, and I'll make sure that we communicate, you and I.
I love the movie Jerry Maguire. What do you think in the movie that they nailed perfectly, or what was your favorite part or moment in the movie?
question was
That you
my
thought
favorite
was
moment
true.
in Jerry
What was your
Maguire.
favorite part of Jerry Maguire that they nailed perfectly, or that your favorite part?
So in Jerry Maguire, they had a mission statement, which is built upon our requirement profiling players, asking that we only represent people that have got some social conscience, a good heart, or starter, and will retrace their roots and set up those charitable and community programs. And so they got the mission statement quite right. I mean, I agreed with Cameron not to say which of what you saw on the screen was based on my life, but the only part of the movie that wasn't realistic is the wide receiver, Rod Tidwell, suffers a concussion at the end of the film, and then he jumps up and is dancing and is doing backflips. Now that probably wouldn't have happened, so that's a little poetic license. But I think it showed the real bonding and friendship that builds in these relationships. Warren Moon and I were together for 23 years when he became the first African-American quarterback in the modern era to be put into the Hall of Fame. And he asked me to give the presenting speech, and that was a breakthrough moment, probably the high point. So Cameron saw that closeness between Warren and I and tried to replicate it in the film.
Wow. You guys, if you follow football, Warren Moon was an iconic figure that came and played in the Canadian Football League and really changed the game, right? I wondered when you watch that movie and you see that scene where Cushman's father says, my word is my oak, oak. And I wonder if that experience has happened to you where someone said they were going to go with you and they did something mischievous, like I thought, was it Bob Sugar did?
All right. So, as you said, I've represented 64 first-round draft picks, but the very first pick in the draft, 8 years, and that's the hardest thing to do. So we're back the night before Drew Bledsoe got drafted #1 by the New England Patriots, and Cameron said to me, "What's your worst nightmare tonight?" This is the night before the draft. And I said, well, the worst nightmare would be, I think I have Drew Bledsoe as a client, but he shifted or fired me at the last minute. That would be a nightmare, and that's what they showed in the film.
But has that happened to you, actually?
No. Which is why I'm wearing a suit. No, but that's a function of getting into the heart and mind of the other person and constantly being in touch. Look, people want to be heard. We all want to be heard. So the athletic relationship is like you and your best friend, that you might not see him for 3 months or 6 months or talk to him, but when you do, you come right back to the same bonded place. And that I've got to be in touch with where athletes are and not lose touch with what their concept is. So we would have taken that father who said his word is oak and then fired Jerry Maguire, and we'd put him in bubble wrap and handcuffs until the draft happened.
So one of the things I admire about Leigh the most is that you can be on top of the world, be the #1 agent in the world ever, have a personal problem, come back from it. We've all been there. I've been through that. Many people I know in the audience have had it. Leigh is a living legend because he does both and he gives back. Everybody, Leigh Steinberg. Thank you, my friend. Thank you. Thanks for watching. Risk on, everybody.